We're on.
Well, welcome to this breakout session here at Farmer to Farmer. This is the Farm Bill Show Me the Money policy breakout panel. I am Ken Barbic. I'm the head of government relations and policy for Farmers Business Network, and I am very excited for this panel today. We have a great discussion for you for the next 45 minutes or so. As we get started, there is a QR code up here on the screen that you can scan, or you can take that link there below and enter that into your browser. We are going to attempt a live audience poll on some key farm policy related questions. So our hope is that you all will participate in full numbers. This will not be a scientifically valid poll, but it will still be interesting for our conversation today. And then hopefully we'll get enough of you to respond that we can show some results towards the end of our discussion and get some reactions on that as well. So that'll be a fun little aspect of what we're doing. The discussion we're going to have today is going to be about the Farm Bill in part. You're going to hear a lot of Farm Bill discussions over the next year. If you go to other conferences, you're going to hear a talk on the Farm Bill at almost every conference you go to for the next several months. We are going to talk about the Farm Bill, but we're going to also talk more broadly about farm policy and farm spending today. We have seen over the last 5 years a lot of investments from the government into farm country through various programs. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we want to talk today about what all of that means as we are looking at a Farm Bill coming up in 2023. Today, we have two of the most highly respected ag policy experts, really, of the last couple of decades with us today. So I'm really excited for these two gentlemen we have with us here today. They shouldn't be strangers to any of you. They don't need introductions, but I'll give brief introductions for both of them still. So we have over here on my right, we have Colin Peterson. So Colin Peterson was the former chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. He served as the head of the committee on the Democratic side for 15 years? 16 years. So he served through several farm bills as the lead Democrat. He also was on that committee for a number of years prior to that. He served in Minnesota's 7th District, the western part of Minnesota, where he grew up there in Minnesota as well. He currently serves as the president and founder of the Peterson Group, his own government relations office, and he has a partnership with Combest Sell & Associates in Washington, D.C. As well. So he is very actively involved in these policy discussions in his new role, and we'll have lots to say, I'm sure, about some of these topics as we get into it today. And then in the center here, we have Mr. Greg Eibach. Also should be not a stranger to anyone here. Greg and I actually served together at USDA for several years. He served as undersecretary at USDA from 2017 to 2021. During his time there, he was responsible for the marketing regulatory program mission area, where he carried out a number of programs related to the Market Facilitation Program, COVID relief programs, such as the Farmer-to-Family Food Box Program, as well as 2018 Farm Bill implementation. Prior to his time at USDA, Greg was also here in Nebraska as the state director of the Department of Agriculture here in Nebraska, the longest serving state director of agriculture here. So excited to have both of these gentlemen up here today. I had the opportunity to work directly with both of them when I was at USDA. I was the head of congressional relations from 2018 to 2021, so I've had plenty of conversations with both of them. Both of these gentlemen will say what's on their mind. You don't have to worry about that. And I was certainly blessed by that on many occasions over my time at USDA. So with that, anything else you all want to say by way of introduction before we get into some discussion today?
No, I think we just get right into the meat of this. So sorry to you.
Great. Well, I'm going to set the stage for us just a little bit here with a couple charts. As we talk about agriculture spending, we're getting into the Farm Bill. But as I said at the outset, there's been a lot of other spending that's happened in agriculture over the last 5 years or so. So just to kind of set the stage, first of all, this is the 2022 CBO baseline consideration for the Farm Bill. So these are the numbers CBO projects are going to be spent in regard to the Farm Bill over the next 10 years. You can see that pie Unfortunately for our panelists, we don't have that on here. We have the poll results, but you see behind you. You see the pie. Nutrition makes up about 85% of that. And then you see the various farm programs there in that pie as well, with conservation, crop insurance, the commodity programs taking up the biggest chunk of the farm spending, trade title, and then other programs related to research, horticulture, and whatnot. So that, kind of broadly, that is the Farm Bill, how it gets broken down into kind of the big bucket categories that will be talked about over the next several months. However, there's been a lot of spending that's not been related to the Farm Bill over the last several years. Here's a chart that kind of gives you a sense of non-Farm Bill ad hoc disaster-related payments over the last 8 years. This includes the WIP program, this includes the WIP Plus program, this includes the coronavirus related payments that went out, and then this includes the ERP program, which is essentially the next iteration of WIP in terms of ad hoc disaster programs going out. And you can see here the amount of spending that has happened under these programs actually in some years has dwarfed what actually happens under the Farm Bill in terms of farm program spending. Here you have what was spent under the Market Facilitation Program. This was the trade payments that happened during the Trump administration in response to trade retaliation, primarily from China. You saw the majority of the money went out in 2019, but 2018 and 2020 as well. You saw, again, significant payments being made out of the Commodity Credit Corporation. This is non-Farm Bill spending, but this is spending and money that, if you were a farmer, probably ended up in your bank account in one way, shape, or form over the last couple of years. And then the next chart here, you see total assistance. So this is basically a combination of all of that. So this is Farm Bill spending, disaster payments, trade payments, COVID payments. These are payments that have gone to farmers, support that's gone to farmers over the last 8 to 9 years. And again, you see the peak there in 2020 when we were in the middle of the pandemic. CFAP program really boosted that up in a significant way. But you've seen some elevation throughout the last couple of years, and that's going to be coming back down with some of those programs coming offline. With all of that in mind, we look at what the impact has been on farm income. So this is net farm income, both with and without government payments. So you see that light blue part of the graph is without government payments, and you see, again, over the last 3 years, how significant the farm payments have been to net farm income over the last several years, which we'll get into, some of how that's going to impact considerations over the next year or so. So we talk about the Farm Bill. You saw that first chart, 85% goes to food stamps and nutrition programs. This here shows you kind of what's been going on in terms of nutrition spending. This is the biggest part of the Farm Bill in terms of money spent. That bottom line there shows you essentially what the participation rate has been in the program over the last 8 years. And then you see over the last 2 years, as we've been in the middle of the pandemic, and the economy being what it is, the increase in outlays. So benefits have been increased through a number of different measures, both through some of the COVID legislation, provisions that were in the Inflation Reduction Act, and then as well as the Thrifty Food Plan change that the administration put forward recently. And then lastly here, there's been additional on-farm conservation spending related to the Inflation Reduction Act. It was passed in August. So about $20 billion in total that went into the conservation programs that are authorized under the Farm Bill. That's going to be part of this conversation as we go into the 2023 Farm Bill. What's going to happen with that money? A lot of it is structured to be spent in later years. And then you have the recent announcement by Secretary Vilsack on the Climate Smart Commodity Program. It's going to be in total over $3 billion in payments for climate smart related practices that we see going forward. So that's all to just kind of set the stage. This is the spending for this audience. This is an informed audience, but just so they all have a sense. Sure, you all, that's not new information to you at all, but just to give kind of a framework to see kind of where the spending has gone and what the impact has been broadly. So to kind of kick it off, we'd love to hear from both of you with all of that in mind. We're going into a farm bill year. What does all this mean? What is that going to mean for this conversation as we go into a 2023 farm bill? We've seen significant spending outside of the farm bill, and yet the farm bill is still viewed as the chief policy vehicle for farmers and for rural America. So with that, I'll turn to the chairman first and let you kick us off.
Well, you know, the farm bill is mandatory spending, so it doesn't have to go through appropriations, you know. So everybody's kind of wanted to be in the farm bill so they wouldn't have to deal with the appropriators. Well, now this spending, most of it goes through the appropriations committee. So the issue is going to be, you know, what are they going to do? How are they going to get that mandatory spending up? Because if you do that, you're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to come up with the money someplace. I think the Republicans probably want to take, they'd like to take some money out of food stamps, shift over there, maybe some of this conservation money. If they do that, they will drive the Democrats crazy, you know, because that's not what they want to do. You have a very different situation, especially in the House. The Republicans represent most of the farm districts, and on the Democrat side, they mostly are there because of food stamps and other conservation and so forth. So that's going to be the sticky wicket, and how they're going to sort all that out. They're trying to get more money from the budget committee. I think it's going to be tough, but they're trying to get, you know, try to get them to give us more money, and you know, depending on how all that plays out, it's going to really depend on how that plays out, how they're going to actually be able to do the bill, you know, how much money they're going to have. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah.
And I would agree with Colin that, you know, a lot of the conversation that you hear with commodity groups has been about, you know, we need to figure out how we're going to attract more money to the farm bill, be able to have more programs, raise support prices, bolster crop insurance or livestock insurance programs. And then with the new administration, we've seen a big focus on climate change mitigation, carbon sequestration programs, and but you know, in some ways, the $3 billion that was spent through the Inflation Reduction Act may replace some of the pressure, because that's 5-year spending, which is almost you know, 3/5 of or all of the farm the term of the farm bill. So maybe there's an argument to be made that the administration has already made the investments in conservation programs through the IRA, and so maybe there won't be as much pressure for that. But I think that, you know, as farmers, you're going to need to be working within your commodity groups, working with your congressmen, your senators, to make sure the programs that you value, they're aware of, and that they are in position to defend those programs, because there is going to be serious pressure from urban America Democrats to continue to increase those food aid programs, and that will come out of farmer-oriented programs.
That's great. Can both of you talk a little bit about the new makeup that we're going to see in the Congress? The Republicans have just taken the majority in the House. The Senate is going to remain in Democratic control, so Senator Stabenow is likely going to remain the chair of the Senate Ag Committee, with Senator Bozeman as the ranking member. G.T. Thompson is likely to be the incoming chairman of the House Ag Committee, with David Scott likely the ranking member now instead of the chair. So what is that, for this audience here, what's that going to mean with that change, at least in the House, but then the interactions between the two bodies? What's that going to mean both for the Farm Bill and then also just for agricultural policy broadly?
Remains to be seen. Nobody really knows how this is going to play out, but you know, you've got the main thing. You're going to have 3 new people in the room when you're doing conference committee. And that's going to be a big change, you know, from Pat Roberts and I being there all the time, Conaway, Lucas. So you've got a lot of new people, don't have a lot of background in agriculture, especially on the Democratic side in the House. And, you know, it's going to take a real magician to sort this thing out, I think. It's going to be tough.
Do you have any, before Greg, do you have any thoughts on just the Democratic leadership side of things? Obviously, Speaker Pelosi has stepped down from leadership. You know, she was very engaged in farm bill discussions in the past. Any thoughts on kind of the new class of leadership and what that's going to mean on the Democratic side?
People are not going to believe me, and they won't believe me, but she was, all my time, 30 years in Congress, she was the strongest leader in either party, in either House, you know, or Senate, for agriculture, because she came from California and she understood ag. What these new people are going to do in the House, you know, it's hard to say. You know, it's Akeem is from New York City. So I think, you know, Pelosi being gone is not going to help, because at the end of the day, she helped me get this bill through. You know. I don't know what Greg thinks, but.
No, I guess I think that it's been kind of an unsettling time for a lot of farmers and ranchers, because with one party rule or one party in charge of all three, the House, the Senate, and the White House, we saw a lot of bills move really fast with not much input from those people that we've probably elected, the Republicans, in those committees and on those committees' input. And so in some ways, I think that, you know, it's going to be good to have the House under Republican control. The Senate's going to be under Democratic control. It's going to slow things down through the process. And the good part about that is, the bad part is it's going to slow things down. The good part is there's going to be debate, there's going to be back and forth. You know, the House's Ag Committee is going to have to negotiate with the Senate Ag Committee and vice versa. So I think that, you know, maybe we won't get a farm bill done as fast as some of us might hope that we would, but I think we'll have a good debate, and usually that debate, that give and take, ends up in better policy than if one party's just ramming it through.
And the dynamic changes because, you know, the Republicans have a group of people that are hostile to farm programs, you know, and the Democrats have a group that really don't understand farm programs, and they could really muck up the works, you know, and we don't know exactly how that's all going to play out.
Yeah, we won't name any names, but I think, you know, Greg and I can probably share stories too of conversations we've had with friends on, you know, on that side as well. And I think that's exactly right, where you have a lot of folks who don't necessarily share the views of farmers and farm country in both parties. You have some of that challenge. So there's some real education and some real fights still ahead of us on a lot of these things. Question, you know, for you as the former chair, you've been involved in the issue of margin protection before. This is a conversation that is starting to increase as we see elevated commodity prices, uncertain commodity prices, but we've also seen a real press on the input side as well, fertilizer, chemicals, seed, other inputs on that side for farmers, squeezing where we're at in terms of the overall margin. There's been this conversation. What are your thoughts from your experience, you know, the margin program with dairy, as others, you know, are thinking about that and contemplating that in a farm bill? Where do you see that conversation going, and any input on that?
They're trying to copy the dairy stuff, but, you know, feed cost is pretty easy to figure out what it is. The problem is when you get to the crops and all that, livestock, you try to nail down the cost of production. I tried to do it in 07 because people were trying to do that back then, and it is impossible because you cannot get agreement amongst the different groups as to what is the cost of production. And if you don't have that, you can't do a margin program, I don't think. You know, and you got to be careful. If you do it the wrong way, you're going to take away from crop insurance, which you don't want to do. You know, so people need to be careful about this. It sounds good, but the devil's in the details.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that, I agree with Colin about being apprehensive about margin protection in row crops. You know, livestock, those feed costs are driven by, you know, world commodity prices, price of corn, price of soybeans, you know, a little bit by drought and whether or not there's forages available. But there's lots of market forces at play, lots of different actors at play determining what those prices are. When we get into crop inputs, it's less actors, more multinational companies. I think there's more potential for manipulation within that if they know that the government's going to pick up the slack and provide for the margin, and that the government's decided that's the fair margin for the farmer out there. I think that could take competition out of some of the crop input side of things.
I think that's a great point. Take a break real quick, and up there on the screen you've got the QR code again. We've got about 25 responses so far, but I see quite a few more than 25 people out there, so it'd be great if a few more folks want to join our unscientific survey, and then if we get a few more responses, we will take a look at some of those results here in just a little bit. On the topic of nutrition and food stamp spending, again, this is something that doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot at a farm-oriented meeting. But we've seen over the last couple of years, we saw the 2018 Farm Bill, the fight that happened over some of the work requirements and eligibility requirements. We saw the pressure to put that, let the administration do whatever they want to do on that front. We see now with this administration changes on the Thrifty Food Plan and taking those actions, which now there's been conversation of looking at, whether that was done appropriately or not. Where do you see, for this kind of group, what do they need to know about this debate on food stamps and nutrition programs and what it means for them, as it all is connected with the Farm Bill right now?
Well, 3/4 of the House Ag Committee, Democrats, that's all they care about. And if you screw that up, you are not going to have a farm bill. I don't think.
Yep.
And that happened in 13 and 18. Those bills failed because of changes in food stamps that were in there until they took them out in the Senate.
Yep.
So whether you like it or not, this is an urban country. Farmers are like 1% of the population, and if you don't take care of the feeding stuff, it's going to be a big problem.
Any thoughts on that?
I think that's correct. One thing that maybe kind of puts it in perspective too is when you have that much spending on providing food to people, it's a demand driver. They're driving demand for our products out there. What I would hope that and what we tried to do in the Trump administration a little bit is really drive opportunities for healthy food choices, fresh meats versus canned meats, fresh fruits and vegetables. The first time that we distributed fresh milk through feeding programs and through food banks was under the Trump administration. Before, they only had access to dried milk. And so I think some of those opportunities are more palatable to farmers and ranchers when they know that their products that they are getting supplied to through those feeding programs are more directly related to them, more directly not further processed, and have more overhead built into them that way.
Do you think something like the farmer-to-family food box is going to become a more regular fixture in these conversations, as you referenced some of those things?
Well, we had a lot of politics involved with whether or not
you might have politics in the future.
They were deemed, a good idea or a bad idea. The people receiving the food reacted very positively to them. There are some factions within the Democratic Party now that heard from their constituents and liked those programs, and so there's a little bit of a new wave as to how might we reinvent that. And so I would like to see that, yes.
Great. From your perspectives, and then I think we're going to turn it over to some audience questions, what is the issue right now that almost no one is talking about that needs to be talked about? in farm policy generally. So this could be Farm Bill related, but it could be more broadly than that. What's something right now that, farmers, need to be aware that policymakers should be talking about this, but it's not being talked about right
I'm
now?
going to let Greg start.
Well, one thing I think it is being talked about, but I don't know if we have the right focus in place on it, is how we deal with greenhouse gases and this administration and a large part of Congress, and probably about in a United Nations poll, 61% of our fellow Americans that are consumers of our agricultural products are worried about climate change. So whether or not I believe in climate change or you guys in the room believe in climate change, our consumers do, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And in fact, they don't only believe that the climate is changing, they believe that we might be in a climate emergency. So we're going to see bills introduced, initiatives by this administration, initiatives maybe trying to be put in the Farm Bill that are going to try to figure out how we as farmers solve the problems of greenhouse gases that we may not be totally responsible for, manufacturing and other things are. And so I think that we need to be expecting our policymakers to be looking to solid research that will actually measure whether or not we are sequestering carbon or reducing nitrogen loss either through groundwater runoff or into the atmosphere. Methane needs to be quantified. You hear a lot of talk about cattle and the pressure that they are putting in methane, and I think that that's overstated. And so we need scientific data to make decisions on, and I think that's something that we need to try to elevate and affect that type of a fact-based discussion.
I think tied into that, we are seeing more disasters and more problems, which has been on that chart, A lot of it's climate change, I think, it's just different weather. We cannot keep spending money the way we are on these ad hoc disasters. We've got to figure out a way to do through the regular system. And nobody's really figured out what to do about that. There's some talk about it, but we really need to dig into that, to figure out what we're going to do for the future. Because these farmers that get affected by these disasters, it's a big deal, and you've got to have a way to deal with it. And we don't have a system right now other than just ad hoc, and that's not going to work long term.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen significant spending, and then the other piece of that, too, is every time you have an ad hoc disaster program, there's certainly folks outside of farming who look and say, well, I thought that's what crop insurance is for. And so you've got, challenges to the current system when we don't do it that way. So, very helpful. I think we've got some microphones around, so I'm going to see if we've got some questions from the audience. I do have one more question for this panel while we get the microphones set. You've both spent a lot of time in Washington, but
Not so much.
not as much, right? But you're both farmers in your own right, and you have grown up in agriculture and in farming. This is a group of folks who mostly has not spent that much time in Washington. What is something that you wish you knew before you went, and something you would say to them, this is something you need to know about Washington as a farmer that they may be surprised to hear?
I don't think you can explain Washington to farmers. It doesn't make any sense.
If you're a dairy farmer, you can.
Yeah, well, a lot of what goes in Washington goes on, it does not make a whole lot of sense. That's what surprised me most about it, is how many goofy things that you're talking about that have no reality in the real world.
I think what I would say, and we still have an active farm and ranch in central Nebraska, and so I always, as I was director of ag and when I went to USDA as an undersecretary, I always tried to figure out, would this be something I'd want to deal with on my farm if I was working on a regulation or trying to figure out how to develop a new program. And what I found is a lot of times I think we as farmers think the career employees at USDA are against us, they don't understand us, they have no farm background or basis. But what I found is the employees at USDA were good people that wanted to do right. Most of them had extensive farm backgrounds, probably had families back home farming. They went to land-grant agricultural universities and had their backing there. And they were very supportive of changes if you could convince them that that was going to help a farmer or a rancher.
Now, you know, a lot of the members now that serve in the House, especially, well, the Senate too, have no real tie to agriculture. You know, they're from an ag area, they support agriculture, but they haven't grown up on the farm. You know, and one of the things that I did probably 10, 15 years ago is I decided that I was going to sign up for every farm program with my farm. So I had to go into the FSA and NRCS office and understand how they work. So I told a bunch of my colleagues that if I had one piece of advice, you should go in and you should get a piece of ground and go in and sign up for all these programs so you can see how it actually works. You'd be surprised how few people have any idea about how these things work, even on the staff. You know, and it's a big problem. So I was known for having a hands-on attitude, and that's where it came from. You know, and I'm a CPA, and I kind of into that kind of number stuff. So.
Yep, that's great. And I can attest to the fact that the chairman has called me on various occasions to talk about his local NRCS or FSA office. So with that, are there microphones? Is there anyone? The lights are very bright up here, so I can't see. There's someone right back there. If you could just say where you're from as well. And what...
You bet. My name is Andy Bose. I'm from Nebraska. Any idea how big of a role crop insurance subsidies might play in farm bill renegotiations, and or what parts of those crop insurance subsidies could be discussed?
Well, there's people that want to reduce them, including the Republican Study Group wants to cut them in half and so forth. My attitude is they're working. They should not be monkeyed with. And for God's sakes, do not tie climate change and that stuff to crop insurance premiums. So there's some people who want to do that. You want to screw up the system. That's the way to do it. You know, so I just think it works pretty well the way it is. I don't think it should be changed. I think it could be improved some, you know, coverage area, but the subsidies, you know, they're working.
And, you know, I would agree with what Colin said about it's tried and true, it's been proven. We have great participation rates in most of the Midwest in those programs. We're seeing improvements in some of the livestock products that are out there, and especially on the beef side, more people are participating in some of those products. You know, I agree with the caution about let's be careful that and watch vigilantly that they don't try to tie climate change or participation in programs that they believe to affect greenhouse gas emissions to participation. What I think we've seen holistically, and it's in CSP, it's kind of the way that USDA has worked in the past, is that if it's good in Florida, it should be good in Minnesota, and that's not the truth. You know, cover crops work a lot better when you have a longer growing season in Arkansas than when you're just hoping you get your corn out before the ground freezes in Minnesota, right, Colin?
That's right.
And so we need to look at programs that actually have an effect in the local area or the state where they're being recommended and that people are being rewarded for. And I also think that USDA and conservation programs have relied too heavily on the expectation that you're a farmer, you have to do something more than you're already doing in order to benefit from the program. We have farmers in this room that I would imagine have been doing no-till or reduced tillage or strip tillage for decades. And to participate in some of the commercial programs out there that might give you benefits outside of the federal government, As you approach those companies, you find out that, oh, well, you're already doing that stuff, so we don't have anything for you. We need to go find your neighbor who hasn't been doing these things, and we'll give them money, but you're not eligible for them. I think we need to start trying to talk to our policymakers about looking what the farm as a whole does. We don't just want to focus on climate change and greenhouse gases and forget about the good things we've done for water quality, water quantity, erosion, species diversification, and those other things that we valued in conservation programs. But the only way that we're going to be able to do that is if we figure out a way to give the farmer credit for everything he's done. And if you've been a progressive farmer, you're going to have less opportunities to change, but you're going to score higher. If you haven't been a progressive farmer on conservation practices, you're going to have more opportunities to add things into your portfolio.
Yeah, to get people to understand that whatever they're going to try to do here has to fit into the cropping rotation and has to make sense economically on the farm, you know, and try to shoehorn something in there that doesn't make sense, you know, is just going to cause a big problem and a big disaster for everybody. And there's a lot of people out there that have no idea what any of this stuff is about. They wouldn't know a cover crop from a sugar beet, you know, you know, it's dangerous. And they hear all of this ideology coming out of the environmentalists and other people, and it sounds good, but it's got to work in the system. And it's going to take some maneuvering to make that happen.
Do you think, I'm just going to take the liberty to ask a question following on that. Do you think with all the geopolitical tensions we see right now and the conversation about national security and the impact our food has in that, how do farmers intersect that conversation right now? We've had a food system for the last 80 plus years that has been predicated on ensuring we produce more than we need and then being able to export that and the food power that projects. And, you know, a lot of the basis for that is the farm programs that we have. If that goes away, then that potentially compromises.
If they screw this up, these food prices are going to go up, and a lot of people can afford that. But not a lot, but there's a group that can. But you got a lot of people that can't afford it. And if you drive these food prices up, what's going to happen? They're going to want more money for food stamps, more money for food shelves to pay for it because the folks can't afford it. People need to be careful. You know, they're lucky to have what's going on in this country. We have abundant food. It's relatively inexpensive. Don't screw it up. That's my message.
So I think the U.S. is going to continue to be, the world's going to continue to rely on us to produce food, especially as we see Europe, parts of Asia, some of South America more slowly, but start putting constraints on production because they're worried about how production affects climate. And I keep talking about climate change, but I think that's driving too much of the discussion right now. And so as long as we can keep sense and in that process and not over-regulate, we're going to have some great opportunities in the U.S. to continue to produce food for the world.
Next question. We got someone right up here. Use the microphone there.
Jeff Anderson from Minnesota. Kind of curious, how do you see the younger generation being able to get into this high capital intense environment with commodity prices? They're good now, but if you've lived this agricultural environment, in 2 years we could be struggling to break even again.
Right.
So I don't know how do we address passing on our farms, or getting the younger generation into some of this stuff and not having them get frustrated and leaving the business.
We have some good programs that we put in place, beginning farmer, all that kind of stuff, and it works to a certain extent. But it only works on small operations. They kind of start off with maybe renting land and so forth. It's a huge problem. If you don't have a family that you inherit this from, It's almost impossible for a young person to be able to start off and farm. The price of land, the price of rent, the price of machinery, it's a big problem. And if you screw up crop insurance, that'll just make it worse, and you're going to have only people with deep pockets, if you do that, that'll be able to farm. And that's going to be a disaster for the country. So people need to be careful about this.
So I think that it's part of what we need to figure out how to solve the problem ourselves too, and look ahead. You know, as you know, I am getting older now. I have a son home that participates in the farm. I have 2 other children that aren't home participating in the farm. You know, how do I structure that transition to maybe the child that wants to be home on the farm, so that when my wife and I pass away, that isn't all messed up, and if he wants to do that. You know, and also for those of us that don't have kids that are returning to the farm, you know, I think that another word to think about is benevolence. I mean, if you're only looking out for, as you get ready to transition or realize that you're going to pass the farm on, you know, my kids are going to sell it and they'll want the most they can get out of it. The neighbor boy isn't going to be able to farm. So how do we maybe work the neighbor boy that wants to farm into it, make sure our kids understand that that's what our expectation in, or maybe put in the constraints within the way we pass the farm on, so that we can help others to maintain the farm. If we don't think about some of those things, and I'm always sad when I see, you know, a Sandhills Ranch go up and somebody that's an investor from California come in and buy it, or Texas come in and buy it, and that just takes that opportunity out of that neighborhood or out of our neighborhood for local kids to stay and thrive.
These land prices and rent prices don't make sense given what the price of commodities are.
Yeah.
So if you don't have some basis to put that on top of, it's not going to work.
Yep.
You know, yet people keep buying land and the rent keeps going up, and I don't know where it's going to end.
Let's take one more question right now, and then I'm going to put we've got about 40 responses so far, so you could have maybe one more minute if you want to submit your response, and we're going to put some of the reactions we've got from the audience after this next question.
Yeah, Andy from Minnesota. You touched on it a little bit ago, and I was going to basically ask your opinion if both of you would agree, all 3 of you would agree for that matter. I have a theory that I don't think is original to me or anything, but I believe our government has a policy. We're going to put cheap food on the plate, on the table of the American consumer at the expense of the American farmer. And we're going to subsidize the American farmer to keep them alive. Because they know, and I don't think this is a Democrat-Republican thing, I think this goes back many administrations and decades. A country where the people are not hungry, they're not going to really get that upset about things. And they go to the grocery store, the shelves are full, the food is relatively cheap. And I guess I'm wondering, do you feel going forward that current administration, future administrations will continue to value that theory that if we provide food for this country that's cheap, that really things are never going to get too bad with regards to people being upset, the non-farming communities?
Oh, we not only have a population that knows that there's plenty of food or feels that there's plenty of food. COVID, I think, maybe woke up some people when they went to the grocery store and there were empty shelves, or they couldn't buy milk or eggs, and the price of eggs right now, I'm not sure you can buy them anyway. But, we have people that have never been hungry. People in Europe have grandparents and parents that were hungry and that knew food shortages, and so they have a different level of tolerance for programs that support farmers and provide subsidies to farmers. I think the mentality of a cheap food has gone away. We're now to a mentality, or edging towards a mentality, of either pay what it costs you in the grocery store, or we're going to give it to you free through feeding programs. And so, I don't think that's a good policy either.
I think it's going to be there for the near future. We've tried this a couple times. We tried freedom to farm, We're going to phase out all subsidies, remember? That lasted about 3 years. It cost us 3 times as much to put it back in place that we saved when we did it. So every time we tried to do this, we've gone back to the kind of the safety net operation again. And I think that will continue. I was reading this morning, the former chef from the White House under Obama was talking about rice and some other commodities becoming too expensive for the ordinary people to be able to buy. I don't know where he's getting this information.
No,
but,
eggs would be an example of that. That used to be the cheapest food you could put on the table for your
I
family.
don't understand how rice could be the one that's the outlier, but have to look into it more. But I think that the public appreciates you guys more than you think. I think they understand they've got a good deal here in America, and if anybody's traveling around the world would see that in a hurry. Probably the best thing we can do in the country is send everybody on a trip around the world and get them to see what's going on. So.
Yeah, I read a poll that was done earlier this year where the top 3 professions all ranked at about 85% approval rating, and it was doctors, scientists, and farmers were all tied for number 1. Unfortunately, politicians were not that high on the list, but that's why we're not doing those things
Even after
anymore.
we're rehabilitated?
Exactly, we're all rehabilitating now. So with that, let's take a look at some of the results here. See if the folks in back can put those up on the screen here for us. And take a look at how the audience responded. So we see here, hopefully folks can see that clearly up on the screen. We had 42 of you responded, and just over 90% of you were farmers responding. So looking down there to question number 2, we asked, what farm bill policy outcome is most important to you in a new 2023 farm bill? It looks like the vast majority said addressing reduced margin risks through crop insurance or other programs. Second was increased commodity reference prices, and then incentives for practice changes for climate, and then a number of others that were at a lower level there. Third question was, what policy-related outcome is most important to you in 2023? So you could pick a new farm bill getting done. 14% of you picked that. The vast majority, 33%, said inflation to come down. So things related to input prices, fuel, interest rates, things that are not handled in the farm bill necessarily. Trade and export issues being resolved, big number there. Ag guest worker immigration reform comes in a little bit behind the farm bill. So some interesting reactions there from the audience. Number 4, we talked about, these next few questions talked about climate smart agriculture. So just this base level question of, are you aware of incentive programs available to you? Half of you said yes, half of you said no. The next question was, based on what you know today, are you likely to participate? Based on what you know today, 60% say no and 40% say yes. The people who want to participate were probably in that session next door, so this might be, again, not scientifically based here. But then this is kind of an important question. In regard to climate smart agriculture, and some of what Greg was talking about earlier, what factors are most important to you in making that decision? The level of incentive provided is the most important factor for most of you. Getting incentives for, I think, existing practices, impact on yield, those are all important issues for you to consider in that. Second most, some of the same considerations. So a lot of you picked first, second, third, and just kind of varied, between those top 3 reactions there. And then the thing that wasn't significant was kind of across the map there a little bit. Number 7, did MFP, the trade payments and the coronavirus assistance, what did that do for you? We see here that 31% of you said it helped you break even. So that's pretty significant. The next group made an already profitable season more profitable. And then the other few buckets there kept you in business. About 14% of you kept you in business. And then made you profitable, 14%. And then for 12%, didn't have any impact meaningfully on you there. On the food stamp side, nutrition title, the majority of you said you didn't have a position on the SNAP provisions as long as the farm bill gets done on time. Any reactions to that one there?
Amen.
Yeah, there you go. Kind of in line with what our panel just said. Next question there, number 9. I like this question. When you think of U.S. government ag policy overall, what's your overall feeling? The majority of you said, you kind of split there. It has some impact on me, but I have too many farm concerns for me to pay attention to Washington. The other big group, it has some impact, and I'd like someone to help me make more sense of how it impacts me and my operation. There you go. And then the third group says it has a huge impact. Yeah. So you're kind of divided between those three. Interestingly, no one said no meaningful impact. Number 10, okay, this will be fun. When you think of policymakers, what's your overall feeling? The vast majority think that policymakers generally only care about farmers for political reasons, and sometimes get it right. So there you go. That doesn't account for these two up here. That was not specific for any of us. That's just current policymakers not here right now. And then a few generally understand. And I think you have folks here who would have fit that category. Next question here. Which party seems to care more about farmers? Interesting, 54% Republicans, 31% said both about the same, and then 14% neither. They both could care less. And that's, I think, the chairman made the comment there about, some of the dynamics there. It's interesting that, this reaction here, no one named the Democratic Party here, but, you've got folks on both sides that don't understand farming. You've got certainly a group, as was noted on the Republican side, that would love to cut some of these programs, don't necessarily understand them. So interesting reactions there. And then last couple questions here. What do you feel is the biggest threat to you as a farmer? Government regulation and then inflation and economic conditions are the two biggest factors there. And then the green one there is geopolitical uncertainty, and then light blue is lack of competition among suppliers and buyers. Second biggest threat. So you got the chance to vote on the same topic a second time. So how's that one going to look? Inflation and geopolitical uncertainty and government regulation, still the big winners there in that one. And then lack of competition a little bit higher, and then the retail consumer related expectations they're factoring a little bit larger there on that one. So those are the questions. The rest are demographic related responses there. Any reactions to any of those? Does anything from that surprise you from this audience?
Kind of what I've been hearing from folks. Mm-hmm. Farmers, these farm groups are focused on reference prices. Mm-hmm. That's what they all are kind of zeroing in mm-hmm. on. There's some talk about disaster programs mm-hmm. or crop insurance, but it seems like the commodity groups are focusing on the reference prices. And I don't quite understand that, because rice has a problem with reference prices. So their prices have not gone up, and their inputs have. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that are really in a squeeze more than any of the other commodities. So I can see why they would be concerned, but these other reference prices, if you raise them 10%, it's $15 billion over 10 years. You raise them 20%, it's $30 billion. Mm-hmm. Well, at 20%, I'm not sure any of these commodities, other than rice, are going to dip into that reference price. So
you'll lose your allocation in the Farm Bill and get
right.
nothing
so then
out of it.
You lose out in the future. So I don't know. We're going to have a discussion about this, but that's what I'm hearing all over the place. Reference prices, more money for the Farm Bill.
Yeah, and looking at our demographics response here, there were no rice growers who responded to the survey. It was predominantly corn and soybeans, but some wheat, sorghum, some livestock folks there as well. So there you've got the breakdown there. So not surprising in that regard either. So with that, it's 4 o'clock. We are overtime right now. Would love to spend more time here. Thank you all for coming. Give a round of applause for our panel here. Thank you for their time. And I think we're going to all head downstairs, but would love to interact with you all more. I think they're going to be around for a little while here still this evening as well. So thank you.